So what is this little image about? We're going to start in the Midwest of the US. Tell us about growing up out there.
My family still lives in a place called Fort Wayne, Indiana now, but for a long time we lived, so Fort Wayne's the big city, which is about 200,000 people, something like that. But we lived about a 45-minute drive outside there in a little town called Bluffton, which is similar size to, what was it, Northam, where we were in the wheat belt, maybe 8,000 or 10,000 people. And my dad worked for a company in an even smaller town called Bern, Indiana, which if you look at photos of it, this is a town that was built in the early 1900s, and it looks like a Swiss village. It looks like Bern, Swiss. It's this sort of Tudor style, big dark wood beams crossing everything, and big Amish population there. So this was a pretty common sight on the streets when I was growing up. Amish at corn harvest time. So like my parents live in, it doesn't look like it from this sort of photo, but they actually have, the areas, all of these, not quite gated communities, but the classic sort of American suburbia. The neighborhood is called, Saratoga Park to represent the Native Americans that are no longer there. And then it's just a series of, quarter-acre, two-story family homes all around. And they live, it would be a 15-minute walk to the local library and supermarket and stuff, but there's no footpaths. You can't walk there. You actually can't walk there. And growing up, it was just sort of one of those things that you dealt with. Just, you drive down to the library or something. But now when I go back, I'm like, how can there not be footpaths? So just as an example of how, Yeah,
it's a good example, actually. And it is part of your perceptions of what reality is, and then suddenly there's something else. But this course is really about how some people step outside of what is and says what can be, what should be, and helps to propel us towards a different kind of reality that is more sustainable. And one of the things we talked about yesterday was that people who do that tend to have come from an enabling family in some way, so that there is a sense that you can be something different if you want to be. You are able to change the world and go out there and take it on. So did you have that sense growing up?
Yes and no. I would say my parents were absolutely supportive and completely filled me with that message of you can do anything you want to if you put your mind to it, sort of thing, no doubt about it. On the other hand, they're both quite conservative people, and the idea that I might live most of my life halfway around the world and be involved in something that makes no sense to them, they struggle with that quite a lot. So I don't know, there's a tension there between, you can do anything you want if you put your mind to it, so long as you kind of stick to the basic rules of, middle class propriety sort of thing.
And so you went to university. Where did you go?
First university was in Indiana. Purdue University was an engineering school.
Yeah. So why did you pick engineering? I don't know, I don't want to blame other people. I was pushed into it a little bit in the sense that Boy.
There's that. Thanks for noticing. If you're good at math and good at science, those are valued more than arts and things, or at least that was the case when I was in school. And so the guidance counselors and people who kind of give you advice on these things said, even from like second year of high school, I wanted to take the woodworking course. That sounded kind of interesting to me. And probably not true to say I wasn't allowed to, but I was really pushed away from it. Like, why would you do woodworking? You're smart. Oh, okay. So I did all the advanced maths, advanced science, whatever. And really didn't know what I wanted to do. And my dad had been an engineer, and so when it came to that, was getting it from my guidance counselors saying, math, science is what we value, and And then my dad sort of said, well, if you don't know what you want to do, engineering's a really good broad education. And I believed him. I don't quite feel that way now, but yeah. Oh, that's what I went into.
That's all changed. You're now a creative filmmaker, and people who get told that you're an electrical engineer can't believe it. So there's a transition happened here somewhere. Yeah. So tell us, how did it all change?
Something I actually really value is the American tertiary education system requires you, even as an engineering student, to get a certain number of credits in arts and humanities stuff. So you do have to have a little bit of breadth in your education. And actually, because I got pushed into all of the advanced science and math classes in high school, and they have a system where you can take, in the States they call them advanced placement tests. So basically, at the end of high school, you can take a test on chemistry, and you can earn university credit if you do well enough on the test. And so I took a series of those. So I basically entered university almost as a second-year student, so I didn't have to do a lot of the science requirements, which freed me up to do even more arts and humanities stuff. So I was an engineering student, but I was minoring in philosophy and taking a bunch of political science and trying to do a bit of both. And yeah, that was interesting. When I went searching for my first job while I was still an engineering student, they had these incredible days at Purdue, because good engineering school, and they would have days they called Industrial Roundtable, and they would send representatives from companies all around, mostly around the States, but really all around the world as well. Boeing and NASA and all of the places. You go, oh, I would love to work there. Okay, and they would send representatives in a big room like this, and they would stand around with display tables, and students would just queue up. There'd be 50 students waiting with a copy of their CV to talk to a representative from Boeing for 30 seconds, like hand them the CV, answer 2 quick questions, and they'd put it on a pile, and they'd ring you back that night or not and call you in for a 5-minute interview the next, just this kind of factory of people going through. And so I turned up at an industrial roundtable and, waited to talk to Hewlett-Packard or whoever it was. And every single one of them looked at my CV and actually chuckled, minor in philosophy, what do you think you're doing with that? Something like that. And pissed me off. And I went to the Lockheed Martin. They mostly make military planes and weaponry and stuff like that. But the guy who was their 30-second chat guy looked at that and said, oh, philosophy, good to see you're trying to be well-rounded. And so I went there. It's kind of funny. They actually hire you as a full-time employee so that while you're a summer intern, you actually start accruing annual leave and retirement and all of these sorts of things. And it's a way to kind of get their hooks in you so that if they like you, yeah.
But they didn't.
It was mutual, I think. Everything about it was strange. I moved to Fort Worth, Texas. They set a record that summer for the most consecutive days where the high temperature was over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, so 39 degrees or something, which probably to you guys is winter, but yeah, I wasn't used to that. And so this was, the factory I was working at had 38,000 employees or something like that, 220 buildings or something, and black asphalt car park as far as the eye could see, and weren't allowed to wear shorts to work. I don't know, coming out there at 5:30 at night and it'd been 100 degrees all day, and walking across the black asphalt into my black car with black interior. I don't know. Not that the weather was the only thing that mattered to me, but look, I actually really loved engineering school. And there were a lot of great courses in the lab where, and again, it's a case of I can articulate it much better in retrospect than when I was in it at the time, but Purdue offered an amazing program that was called EPICS, Engineering Projects in Community Service. And it was a voluntary thing that you got credit for. and they'd put you into a group, all engineers, but electrical and mechanical and civil and, you know, a kind of mixed group of engineers. And then they would assign you to some community partner. So we were working with a group called the Wabash Center, which worked with intellectually and physically disabled kids. It was a kind of daycare center. And the thing was, you'd go there and talk to the therapists who know nothing about engineering, know nothing about what our capabilities are, and they just throw ideas out and say, well, could you make one of these? You know, could you do something like this? And we kind of negotiate with them what we thought our capabilities were. And it might be something really simple, like, you know, there's no shade outside. Could you build some sort of canopy structure? And the mechanical engineers would be like, yeah, or civil, sure, we can do that. And it might be quite a simple project like that. The one that we settled on for the couple of years I was doing the program was they had a lot of kids there with cerebral palsy, and one of the problems with cerebral palsy, they don't have any awareness of their physical selves, so they often sit in their chairs and slouch terribly, and over the course of years that develops serious spinal problems and everything. And so there are some tools that already existed. There's this like baseball cap with a mercury switch, so mercury metal that flows, toxic metal that flows and basically makes a contact or not. And so the kid with cerebral palsy wears the cap, and when he slouches forward, the metal flows, makes a contact, and the thing goes and kind of, you know, stunned, and so he sits back upright. And the therapist, like, in principle, it's a good thing, but the therapist hated it. So it's a toxic metal right near their head, good, and it's this classic sort of negative reinforcement thing. And so they said, you know, could we create something like that that's more of a positive reinforcement? So that was my project for a couple of years with a small group of peers, and we created something that actually had the technology on. We used the cap model, and basically you could measure the angle of the head by measuring the force of gravity in 4 directions, so we could tell what angle the kid's head was at, and transmit that to a box that was plugged into the wall, and then you could plug anything. So you could say plug a television in. To this box. The box had dials on it, so the therapist could set the parameters, say 10 degrees forward, 15 degrees back, or, you know, whatever they wanted. And so long as the student or as the kid's head was within that range, whatever was plugged into the box stayed on. But if they slouched, then the TV would turn off, and they sit back up, and the TV would come back on. And that's it.
That's clever.
Yeah, and that's something where we worked in a small group, start to finish, like conceiving the idea, workshopping it, writing it on paper, you know, doing test circuits in the lab, trialing. You know, that's a perfect creative process.
Yeah.
Where you're involved at every stage, start to finish. And then when I got to Lockheed Martin with 38,000 employees, and they put me in building number 212 at a desk, and it was just kind of you're part of the machine.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's really interesting, because you'll hear in his story that in Christchurch, with the many projects that they've done, there's some ingenious engineering as part of those creative projects that you just can't believe that you thought of how to do it. The dancer mat and the bicycle-powered cinema and so on, they're all extraordinary engineering feats, as well as being very creative and opportune for the moment where you've got no power and you have to create something.
Yeah,
so that goes back to that sort of experience.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is I don't know how to just say this quite right or succinctly or something, but because people aren't really familiar with our project so much, but.
Maybe we could tell them a couple of quick projects.
Yeah, but just what I want to say is one of the big principles that we stick to now is really shattering any sort of disciplinary boundaries or affiliation, and not in an aggressive sense, whatever, but just not really thinking that way, not caring about it. So a lot of our projects, you know, people look at and they call it art or community art. Some call it community development, some call it urban design. So, you know, we don't care. That's fine. And likewise, like, there's this strange divide, you know, that at university in New Zealand, Canterbury especially, because it's an engineering school, and there's like this tension, conflict between the engineers and the arts students, where the arts, call the engineers kind of idiots and, have no creativity and whatever, and the engineers call the artists useless, and, do you have that here? BA degree stands for bugger all, and whatever, okay. And this sort of thing, and it's just ridiculous, because engineering is creative, and artists, use engineering skills, all that, I don't know. Anyway, so try not to buy into any of that.
We're used to that, but in sustainability, we've dropped all the disciplines.
Yep.
And central to what we teach is the ability to cross the disciplines all the time.
Yeah.
Not worry about that.
That's great.
Just directly engage. But that's a very clear thing that you've been able to do in Gapfiller. So before we tell some of those stories, how did you end up in New Zealand? It's really, it's a long way from the Corn Belt.
Yeah, it was while I was still a student at Purdue, actually. It was after that summer at Lockheed Martin, and all I can say is things didn't feel right to me. I kind of saw that, like I said, they hire you as a full-time employee even when you'd go and just do your summer there, and I had this kind of vision just looking down this one-way road, which was a 60-year career with Lockheed Martin. Like, it felt like everything was already laid out in front of me, and that there weren't any turns on that path. And I just thought, I'm not ready for that. There's got to be a little something else out there. And so a little bit awkward, wasn't entirely approved of, but in the last year of my engineering degree, I did a study abroad program. So I went to they had an organized study abroad office at Purdue University, and I said, I want to go away somewhere, preferably somewhere they speak English and somewhere far away. Those were my criteria. And
you didn't end up here.
No, actually, but there were, I did look into it, and I don't think there were any organized exchanges with anywhere in WA, but there was with like University of New South Wales was an option, but there were like 14 people from Purdue University going to UNSW, and there was only one going to Canterbury in Christchurch. And that was, honestly, that was my criteria. Just, see ya. And so my first year in New Zealand, I was finishing my engineering degree, but I didn't have to have any more engineering courses because I'd finished all my engineering requirements. So I went to New Zealand for a year, and all I had to do was take like 3 arts courses to finish my engineering degree. It was a kind of a strange situation.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So what did you do?
It's also arbitrary. They wouldn't let me into the courses that I wanted to, because they said I didn't have the prerequisites. There were a couple philosophy courses that I wanted to take. I was interested in a Maori culture course, but it was a stage 3 or stage 4, and they said I would have had to, whatever it was. And the theatre and film people, I was interested in maybe taking one film course, and met with the head of the department, and she kind of sold me on some of their other courses, and so I ended up doing a lot of theatre and film stuff. Because they wouldn't let me in the other things.
So that's how you started a film career, by mistake.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. but it's I was looking for something, I couldn't articulate what it was, but I was running away because I was looking for something. And I think if I'd ended up in a sustainability course or whatever that first year, I'd still be doing that today. If I'd ended up in political science, if I'd ended up in chemistry, I don't know, probably could have been almost anything.
Although something special happened with this film course.
So coming to theatre and film studies, both, you approach every problem and there's no right answer. You can only talk kind of in terms of tendencies, something like that. And also that it was the first time where I was really encouraged to use myself as a case study, or think of myself as think of myself as an experiment. Think about how I react to this performance or that performance or this film or whatever, and then extrapolate from that internal experience and say, okay, so what's going on here? Why, do other people react in this way? And what is it in the film, in the editing, in the acting, and whatever it might be that triggers these responses. And so you start to have much more of there's much more place to articulate your own experience, and also to have a kind of social awareness of yourself as part of the human race and as part of a society, which in engineering there's none of that. So that really appealed to me.
So tell us about this performance in the street. What was all that about?
Yeah. So every year someone would direct an end-of-year production that would involve all the theatre students, and this was in 2000, and there was the millennial fear going on that the end of days were coming, or something like that. That was part of it, and also it was a big year for celebration of New Zealand nationhood, and it was quite striking to the people who said, I was just one of the kind of grunt soldiers helping out with the production, but the people who kind of set up the framework for it really noticed, it's kind of uncanny how much war plays a role in the New Zealand sense of national identity for such a small kind of peaceful country, more or less. The Anzac experience is really integral to when New Zealand first established a distinct identity from the motherland.
We know all about that one.
Yeah. So they set up an open-ended project, and being involved in such a way that it wasn't my idea. Someone else set up the idea, and I was just kind of pitching in. So it was almost that's something definitely, if we think in terms of leadership, whatever, something that we still do, that I think there's a really unfortunate tendency to think of leadership in terms of individuals, and someone like standing out from the group and taking charge and whatever. And actually, like with gap filler projects, I could very easily claim half a dozen of the projects as mine. They were my idea, and I was the one driving them. And whatever. But what do you gain from that? All you do is you sort of alienate other people from being involved. Whereas if you pitch everything as a gap filler project, I don't care who came up with the idea or who does what, it's a collective. Then some people who aren't comfortable being, more overt leaders can kind of hide behind the shield of the organization and still be involved and still drive something forward in that way. It just creates, but without putting yourself on the line individually. Like, even myself, some of the ideas I've had, I think if it was my name and my person attached to it, I would be a little too scared to try it, because people might not like it, and then that would reflect on me personally. But if you run it as a gap filler project, then it's like, if people don't like it, oh well, we've done 50 other things that they did like, so that, Yeah.
So fast forward to the earthquake. You're in New Zealand, you've been there for how long?
10 years at that point.
11 years, and pretty well established, and the earthquake happens. Just tell us a bit about the earthquake. It must have been pretty shaking up of the soul, as well as the very first earthquake, which happened 4 years ago today, actually. Yes. Yeah. So I don't know, people know, so there was an earthquake September 2010. It was a magnitude 7.1, but it was centered about 35 kilometers outside of the city, and it happened at 4:30 in the morning. Lots of buildings collapsed and whatnot, mostly in the central city, but no one died. And then there was an aftershock 5 and a bit months later. There was actually a smaller earthquake, but the epicenter was much closer to the city, and that's the one that did most of the damage and killed people and stuff. When the first earthquake happened, I was in Wellington. I was in Wellington on tour with the same theatre group that I'm still working with 14 years later. We were doing a production, we were touring a production called Distraction Camp,
which picked up, like the way we worked with Last Days of Mankind, where we take some sort of play text or theme or something as inspiration and develop our own production out of it. There was some statement by a real sort of cultural provocateur that kind of turned this idea of a concentration camp on its head and said, you know, we think of ourselves as being so free in this kind of liberal democratic society, but actually we're just living in a distraction camp. Like there's all of these ways that we just distract ourselves, and it's much the same. You know, you can't pursue a life full of meaning because we're watching reality TV or whatever it is. So we took that as a kind of provocation to make a production. So we made a production called Distraction Camp, and we're in Wellington doing it. So this is something that felt meaningful to us, that we were engaging with society and trying to make people think, whatever. But then we all got woken up at 4:30 in the morning because even Wellington shook. Oh yeah. And got woken up, and Wellington's known for earthquakes, so we thought it was a earthquake in Wellington, but turn the TV on at 4:30 in the morning and see images of Christchurch in ruins. And we were still in Wellington for another 10 days maybe touring, and having to turn up at the theatre every night and do our production, which had previously felt quite meaningful to us, when you know that your hometown's in ruins and going through all sorts of things, that let's say upped the ante.
Yeah.
Where I said, okay, Distraction Camp felt pretty meaningful, but it's not meaningful in a practical sense. It was meaningful in a philosophic sense or something, and I still think that's important, but at the time of the earthquake, it was a real challenge. So, we finished the tour, and it was really hard work, turning up every night and doing that production. But going back to Christchurch afterwards, then I felt like what we were doing had to be a bit more practically applicable. Yeah, and so that's where I guess
You immediately thought of gap filler?
There was a block up the road from where we were staying in the hotel in Wellington. There was a site that was a car dealership, and the car dealership went out of business, and someone put up a little temporary glass house and put a few picnic tables there and had a little coffee caravan. And we hung out there a bit and just started talking about, like, all these buildings are being demolished back in Christchurch.
So you got back, and how did you start work?
I'll say it this way. The lucky thing happened that Coralie lost her job immediately on returning to Christchurch. She was working on doing an artist residence program and working at an art gallery, and they made her redundant and gave her a couple months redundancy pay. First day we got back.
Welcome back.
Yeah. But it never would have happened without that. This is one of these things, I still don't know quite how to make meaning of that, but the idea that she was getting paid for 2 months and didn't have to worry about working. Gap filler wouldn't have been created if it wasn't for that. But she was at a loose end, and we'd seeded these ideas in Wellington, and she lost her job and thought, oh, well, got some time now, let's do it.
You got friends together to form this. It wasn't just you and Coralie.
Yeah, it was for a start.
Okay.
And really that little pop-up cafe in Wellington was kind of our starting point, because it was really about trying to counter that logic of let's build a lot of tilt slab buildings tomorrow for the Rugby World Cup visitors, and that was our raison d'etre for the first project, really. We went shopping for collaborators. We met Andrew, who's became one of the co-founders. He's an architect. We didn't know him previously, but we just started talking to friends about our idea, and they said, oh, you should talk to this guy Andrew, he's been having similar thoughts, okay? And then one of Andrew's friends worked for a swimming pool company, but he was a project manager, and thought, okay, got him on board, and a graphic designer, a couple other people just to help out with the first project. And basically we did like that Wellington cafe. We just took a site where a building had been demolished and occupied it and turned it into a public space for a couple of weeks.
The basic idea that gap filler evolved into, and is now, is that you can experiment with your city. You can create futures, try them out in a temporary way,
Mm.
and if they work, you know, they seed and they grow in other ways. So it's like you are doing future scenario planning, but you're doing it on the ground.
Yeah.
You're actually trying it out and bringing people with you.
Yeah.
So maybe you should just describe some of these stories and the impact that it did have on people. That you got no permission to do this, by the way, did you? You just did it.
Depends on what you mean by that. I mean,
Okay.
we didn't. We did ask the property owner. In fact, our very first site, you can't see it when the buildings are demolished, but there's property boundaries everywhere. So it looked like one site, but actually two different people owned it, and there was a line down the middle, so we had to ask both of them. And one of the property owners said, yeah, sure, go ahead. And the other one, who was actually a real estate agent, he said, yeah, but I don't want to be held liable. You'll need to have insurance and you need whatever. And so we went and talked to a law firm, and they helped us draft up a legal agreement, and we entered into an agreement with that property owner and got an insurance policy and all of that stuff. So
Bit of junk, yeah.
we weren't totally guerrilla in that sense. It
Yeah.
was, you know.
So what was that first project on that site?
Yeah, we just rolled out the fake turf, got some potted plants and, you know, furniture from the dump, and just created a public space. And then we got a PA system and just put a call out. Basically had an open mic, said if anyone wants to play music or tell stories or whatever, there you go. You know, we'd lived in the city and our lives were around the CBD, so wanted to give people a reason to come back into the city.
And did it work?
Still doing it. Yeah.
But that
Indeed.
particular site,
Yeah.
how many people turned up?
Maybe 1,600 people turned up or something like that, considering that we didn't advertise or anything. It was just a
Didn't pay
kind
any
of...
performers, or
No.
it just all happened. So then you just pull that up and move on. You do another one. You don't do the same thing again.
Well, that wasn't, you know, we didn't set out to create an organization and do 50 projects. We set out to do one project. And if it's... I've got an interesting relationship to planning, because it's really important to be thinking ahead and thinking about the future in some ways. But it's also really important to kind of live in the moment and react to the context around you. And if you're talking about experimentation and you really put your money where your mouth is, that means there has to be a big element of not knowing what comes next. And so, we certainly didn't set out to create a charitable trust and, you know, We were just doing one project. And then after that project, you sort of compare notes, go what went right, what went wrong, should we do another one, what should we do next, and go from there. And this is something I learned from those theatre productions as much as anything, was the way to plan for things is you just set up a framework. And the framework has to be clear enough to give some certainty, but loose enough to allow, you know, other people to come in with their own ideas. Some engineering student to come in and go, I want to build this thing. Okay, yep, that can be part of it. And to kind of respond to what really happens then. It's not easy.
Well, tell us a bit about some of the creative ones, like the dancer mat and the bicycle cinema. They're pretty amazing ideas. How did they happen?
One of the things I've only really become aware of in the last couple of days, talking to people here actually, is how much we focus our projects around communities of interest rather than geographic communities. Mm-hmm. And so I would say most of our projects actually come out of, we get offered the site of where an old cycling shop used to be, because, go in and get my bike repaired by the guy where he's reopened his new shop, and strike up a conversation, and he says, I actually own the site over there where the shop used to be. Would you want to do something there? Oh, okay. And so we start to get in touch with the cycling community, say we should do a cycle-themed project. And that's our framework. We have a location, and we say we'll do something cycle-themed. That's enough. And then you start talking to people, and the ideas slowly emerge. Someone says, oh, well, the site itself, there's a big wall next door, we could project films onto that. Okay, maybe we'll do a cycle film project, okay. So you start thinking about that. And some people, I'd worked for film festivals and stuff like that for a while, so I started thinking in terms of programming, curating. Okay, so we can show the Triplets of Belleville and Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and started thinking of all the films that really feature bikes and cycling. And I'd worked at the New Zealand Film Archive, so there were these wonderful there's a 1950s little film that was teaching kids road safety rules, road rules, how to ride your bike and tell people when you're going to turn, and they trained chimpanzees to ride bicycles, dressed them up as a little family, and this was the road safety video, was chimpanzees riding bicycles and whatever, and thought, we got to show that one, all right. And so that was kind of my contribution, and someone else, actually my flatmate was an engineer, and she said, we could probably run the thing off cycle power. Like, really? And okay. And so I worked with her a little bit, and we got an old guy, out-of-work electrician, offered to help wire it up and whatever, and they spent a few weeks pottering away and kind of brought those ideas together. And so we had 10 people would cycle to generate the power to run the projector and the sound system, and we just did a series of cycle-themed films on the site.
And you had LED lights showing you when it was starting to need more power.
Yeah.
The audience would cheer you on. Did they constantly change, the people who were riding the bikes, or was it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix. Sometimes, people would actually turn up in groups sometimes. So like 4 of them would turn up with the idea that they would take shifts on the one bike and rotate in and out. And some people, actually a guy that's running for Parliament now, turned up one night with a 6-pack of beers in his Lycra, and he's like, this one's mine, I'm lasting the full 2 hours. And he went there 2 hours on the bike, chugging away, downing his 6-pack the whole time.
He's going to get elected?
I hope so, actually. It's pretty cool, but no.
Yeah. Okay, I think it's time for a few questions from the audience, from the course, from the students. Renee.
When I met you 3 years ago at a conference, you spoke, in your paper, you spoke about how you lost your home and that there was a certain, without putting words in your mouth, freedom perhaps that came from the loss of things.
I guess that's part of it, where when you lose all your stuff, suddenly it's like, ooh, can reinvent myself.
Talk about that though. What happened to you in the earthquake?
I was in the university library, a book fell on my head. It was a small book, it was all right. University was on the west side of town, the earthquake struck on the east side, so it's second earthquake, yeah. So it was a pretty good shake, and everyone in the library, some of the light fixtures like this, fell down to the ground, and a couple of people had close calls or whatever, but there was a kind of giggling, nervous release of energy. Everyone filed out of the library, 1,000 students in the sort of courtyard area kind of going, wow, how about that? Well, and then, the cell phones started ringing and people going, oh, my house fell over. I just got a call from so-and-so out east, and, we think the cathedral fell over, or, these sort of things started coming in. You go, ooh. It was I'm trying to remember now, hang on. It was either just before or just after the first day of the new semester. I can't quite remember, but I was frantically preparing for a lecture, and I got a call from Coralie, who was hysterical.
She was at home?
And said she was at home. She said, our house fell over, or something like that. I can't quite remember. And I was like, okay. And then the phone cut out because everyone in the country using their cell phone at the same time. And I went, they wouldn't let us back into the building where my office was at the university, and I said to my colleague, like, would you please, I've got 3 books on my desk, will you please grab them because I'll need them for tomorrow's lecture? And she said, okay, yep, sure, and I hopped on my bike and like headed home, and as you're cycling from west to east, it was like just kind of slowly dawning on me the magnitude of what had happened, because I had to drive through or kind of around the downtown area to get home, and thought, wow, yeah, quite clearly thought, oh, for some reason the number 500, I said, oh, 500 people will have died. I don't know why that's stuck in me. Okay, I was wrong. It was 185. Yeah. And so I say home, we were renting, but it was still home. And we had an old, like 100-year-old villa, brick walls, and the brick walls had just exploded. So it was a timber frame house, but had brick firewalls, and the bricks just shattered out. So, and Corley was working from home doing gap filler stuff, and yeah, had been in the house at the time, and got a pretty good scare. Like no one knew what to do. There wasn't there, it takes a good day or so for emergency services to really kick in and stuff. So we slept in the back shed, and I don't know, all of these fears of, oh, will people riot? Isn't that what people do after natural disasters? Like, do we need, so we had, shovels and rakes in the corner in case people turned up to act. I don't know what goes through your head, watch too much pop culture or something. At some point in the night, we all smelled smoke, and we thought maybe this, it would be coming towards our house or something. So a couple of us went out on the street with shovels, just in case there were rioters or whatever. We lived in the central city, and it was actually it was about 2 blocks away was the CTV building, which was smoldering all night long. That's where most of the people in the earthquake died, in the collapse of that building. And that's what we were smelling. That afternoon, we went into the house and grabbed, 3 changes of clothes, laptop computer, insurance paperwork, passports, and a few things like that, and popped it in a backpack. And I think that's the moment I sort of refer to as that I felt on top of the world in a weird way, like obviously in shock, trauma, or whatever, but it's like standing in the front yard, looking at the house, like, there's no question, we're not going to live there ever again. It was, okay, what next? And so I've got all my possessions on my back now, anything's possible. Like that sort of sense was quite a good feeling for a little while. And what's starting to happen in Christchurch, and it really is like this year starting to happen, at the same time that we're exploring and innovating in the social realm, let's say, creating new governance structures, creating new frameworks and ways of working, for gap filler projects, there's also like lawyers who are getting creative, thinking about legal structures and stuff like that. And there are economists and accountants and stuff getting really creative on new ways of funding things and new, accounting structures and stuff like that. And we're only just kind of catching wind of a lot of this stuff. And I think what's really exciting me at the moment is the idea of actually creating an alternative or some competition to like the private developers. Like, could we, according to these same principles and values, could we build a hotel where the whole thing's the equity's crowdfunded, the ideas are crowdsourced. So it's like we do with our own projects, not saying, here's a design for a hotel, we're going to build this, 6-story, blah, 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 but just say, okay, the idea is a hotel. Now, what will it be like? What will the rooms be like? And start to, anyone who wants to be involved starts to pitch in, and the idea starts to grow. How will we run it? Will we have, it doesn't have to be staffed by minimum wage people at a front desk. Let's get creative about that. How are we going to staff it? How will people check in and check out? And how will the money work? And who will, all of that stuff. It's a big project, but it's entirely possible that we could.
Co-design a new thing.
Yeah.
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 Because design is all about the virtual city that underlines every city. And suddenly, with the physical fabric gone, the virtual city becomes different. It can be different. So the opportunity's there. But, you know, Berlin and Detroit are recreating themselves at the moment because they're, you know, fallen apart to some degree. Perth is, you know, in a big growth phase, but bits of it are not, like Fremantle. So recreating the potential future.
But certainly we talk about the city in terms of where's the city headed, and you know, and we try not to draw such a boundary line between, oh, we're only worried about our organization, and what we're, like, our organization only exists because of the context of this city, and so we're always talking about what sort of city are we contributing to 10 years from now, 20 years from now? What do we want the city to be like? What are other people doing? Therefore, what do we need to be doing?
But if you come back to your little framework thing, when you grow that out to planning, which is sort of, like you say, you don't like, planning is about actually establishing a framework which private sector or whoever comes and does stuff. The question from a planning point of view is, how good is the structure of your framework? Not how good is the structure of your framework, but what's the value set behind the structure of the framework?
I hope I didn't say I don't like planning, just said I have an ambivalent relationship there. A real tension, first of all, between, like, I don't know if it's right to call it object-oriented planning versus a more integrated kind of incentive approach to planning. So where the central government in Christchurch has said, stadium here, convention centre here, it's about the thing, the object, boom, 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 that's what they call planning. And the local government was trying to take a more incentive-based approach that kind of got vetoed, but of saying, like, you know, incentives for mixed use, incentives for building low-rise buildings, incentives for, you know, to try to just till the soil and let the right sort of things grow there that people want to plant or something, which appeals to me much more. I don't necessarily object to the values being hidden. We do in Gap Filler talk about, in one sense, trying to promote our values through our projects, not verbally, not saying these are our values, but to make it clear through what the thing is that people will kind of implicitly start to adopt our values. And that's interesting, actually, in a maybe slightly more radical sense or roundabout way. So my PhD thesis was about strategies of political theatre. And do we have a few minutes?
Yeah.
I'll race through this as quickly as I can, but you can't talk about a thesis in 30 seconds. So where in, like, the early days of political theatre as a discipline, it was largely associated with the Communist Party, and political theatre was something that was really striving for a revolution, like a fundamental overthrow of our social system. And the starting point for my thesis was just the observation that nothing like this exists anymore. There's a hell of a lot of political theatre out there, but it's about kind of identity politics or particular smaller issues, and there's nothing approaching things on that fundamental level. And partly I attribute that to the fact that, for people sort of my age and younger, I was 11 years old when the Soviet Union was disbanded, and I have no sense that there could be a valid alternative to capitalist democracy. That's the only thing I've ever known, the only thing that's ever had any sort of currency in my lifetime. So you can't blame us for being kind of apolitical in the macro sense. I guess my belief is that we can, some of the most fundamentally political or mind-changing stuff we can create might not be overtly political at all. That actually just through an aesthetic or creating some sort of experience for someone, giving them a taste of another way of being or another sort of social logic, could sow the seeds for a much more radical way of thinking than anything kind of overtly political. And so I like to think that that's possible in what we're doing with Gap Filler anyway, is like creating, in the society we live in, you're never going to flourish, say, economically, unless you adopt a competitive, individualistic approach to your life and to what it is that you do. But we're creating projects where people get a little taste of cooperative, collaborative, generosity, whatever. And we don't fly a banner. It's not a political, it's not anti-capitalist, it's not whatever.
What
But
talked about leaving the chairs and tables out on Monday evening.
yeah, absolutely. You just create a sense of that a different sort of social interactions possible, and if you extrapolate from that, or if you really stick to that, to really live by those principles is pretty radical. If you follow through on that at every level, but it's not overtly political, and
But it's shifting.
It
is shifting.
Yeah,
values
sure.
set. Yeah. So do
Yeah.
you get people writing to you from other cities saying?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, and I have a really, I struggle a bit with imitation. Or you said something the other day about, or was it Brad? No, it was Brad in the panel that said, you imitate something with just a slight twist to make it your own, and then people call it innovation, and that's fine. But I get really frustrated actually with people make suggestions all the time on our Facebook. We use social media as a sort of crowdsourcing thing, and the number of people who've said, Candy Chang, a visual artist in New Orleans, and she started this thing. She went around New Orleans and wrote up, painted, blackboard paint on bare walls, and wrote, "Before I die, I want to," and then left a lot of blanks, and people could just write in, whatever it is. I can't tell you how many hundreds of people have said, "Oh, we should do "Before I die, I want to," whatever. And but is that meaningful to us, particularly in Christchurch? Is there a way that we can take that idea and twist it and make it a little more relevant to our particular scenario? It's incredible how much people want to just repeat exactly what they've seen elsewhere. And that's something we're battling with as well when, this is maybe a good example. A lot of people get in touch about our Dance-A-Mat project and say we'd love to have a Dance-A-Mat in Adelaide or in Melbourne or in San Francisco or whatever. And we say, why? And actually make them answer, why. But it got to a point now where it's just silly for us not to pursue this in some way. So we're working on a how-to manual, like how to build a Dance-A-Mat. And this is happening right now. So we've got some people doing the 3D CAD drawings and actually creating the technical, okay, you get a pole that's this long and you get a bolt and this goes there and you screw that in, step 1, step 2, step 3. But at the same time, we're talking about the social side of things and how to engage with your community, talk to the dance groups in the community, gauge whether there's an interest for this at all, how you set up the structure, get people involved in the creation of it. And we're actually just like you can picture the technical diagrams of this bolt goes in that hole and the dotted line. So we're kind of doing the same thing with get your dance group, get the phone, connect, and so we're kind of blending the social how-to with the purely technical how-to, hopefully as a way, again, so when someone rings up and says, can we have a Dance-A-Mat in Adelaide, my instinct's actually to say, why the hell do you want that? Think about what but rather than abusing them, we'll say, okay, yes, here's this manual that we can sell you, thanks. And part of the manual actually hopefully makes them think in that way about, is this even relevant to where we are and how do we make it so?
In retrospect, you're seeing a deeper story.
Oh, I hope I articulated that somewhat. I mean, the decision to go to New Zealand was totally arbitrary. There was nothing deeper in it, like the specificity of Christchurch and New Zealand. It really was just, I wanted to be far away. I knew almost nothing about New Zealand, certainly nothing about Christchurch. The only reason I chose Christchurch was because that was the one university in New Zealand that Purdue University had an exchange program with. But I think I tried to articulate that, something about the values and what I was experiencing at, say, Lockheed Martin was quite deeply unsettling to me, and I couldn't articulate it at the time. I still struggle a little bit, but I just kind of was looking for something, and I landed in New Zealand and landed in this theater program, which was something of an antidote, provided a way of being a bit more about myself, a bit more about, my more room for subjectivity than engineering. And I suppose culturally maybe there was a moment in my first year in New Zealand where one of my friends that I was hanging out with quite a lot bought a new car, and we were hanging out at his place one night, and he's sort of, about 10 of us, and he said, "Oh guys, come out and see my new car," and Nissan something or other. I know nothing about cars, I don't know. And so we went out into the garage and he showed us his new car, and about half of that group of friends sort of said, "Why'd you do that? Like, why'd you spend so much, what?" And kind of had him up about it. And I just couldn't imagine that happening where I grew up. At least where I grew up in the States, new things are always good. There's no questioning of that. And so it sounds so simple, but that was a moment for me where, there is quite a cultural difference here.
The gap between now and the future, you look at or just live at the time. Just come up to your mind and do something, You look at the future and try to change something and respect the future.
Yeah, I think you have to operate at all levels simultaneously. And someone said this the other day, actually, that, in relation to city planning. I can't remember who it was. Said something like, simultaneously you have to be doing your short-term annual plan, your 10-year plan, and your 30-year plan all at once. And I think that's very true. And so we are, as an organization, Gap Fillers is sort of doing this, where we have one group of people, our programming committee, talking about what are we going to do this summer, what projects are next on the pipeline, and working on planning those. At the same time, we do sort of strategic governance stuff and work with City Council, who are now going through their long-term planning process, their 10-year planning process, and talking to them about what our plans are and how we see ourselves fitting in that process, what's happening in the city, what's not happening, where do we need to be. And so those things happening simultaneously. We also, in a slightly different way, maybe more aligned with creative practice or something, we are spending a lot of time working at being more outcome-oriented rather than output-oriented. So it's not just about, we've done 50 projects, which is what we always say, and people hear that, and that gives them a sense of how prolific the organization's been or something. But if you do 50 projects and no one turns up and it has no impact, who gives a shit? So it's about what social change are you actually creating, and so we're starting much more to articulate the outcomes and actually to start with the outcomes. So when we're planning a project, rather than saying, okay, our next project is going to be a dance-o-mat, okay, now why are we doing that again? And sort of retrofit some outcomes. We actually start with, all right, what's missing in the city? What do we need to do? Okay, the real problem is that there's still 95% of the population lives in the suburbs and they don't come into the city for any reason. So we need to create, okay, that's our next, outcome that we really want to achieve, is getting people from the suburbs into the city. And then we start to develop the project out of the desired outcome and whatever. So that's one way of, future-oriented planning. At the same time, we allow ourselves some flexibility. So when we're programming, and say, next season we're going to do 6 projects. And 4 of those projects, we go through this outcomes process and kind of work backwards from that. And 2 of the projects we just leave there as we'll decide on the day. And so we still allow ourselves room for some of that spontaneity that I don't know why, but I think our next project should be this. And I don't even care to articulate what we're trying to achieve with that. Let's just do it because I'm excited about it. So we build in some room for ourselves to still be spontaneous in that way as well. Performance studies as a discipline stems out of sociology and anthropology, and particularly this guy Victor Turner, who was looking at kind of tribal rituals in different societies and looking at them in terms of a kind of theatrical metaphor. And he talks about every rite of passage or social ritual having a phase that he refers to as the liminal phase, the kind of in-between, where, if you're go through a wedding ceremony, you get engaged, you say these words, and at the other end you come out and you're changed. You are different than you were at the beginning of the ceremony, and there's this period. Sometimes it's just a few minutes, sometimes it's several months, this kind of in-between where you're neither one nor the other. And he says in this liminal phase, it's kind of a throwaway comment. He didn't go into it too much, but he talks about the subjunctive mood, so a grammar term, this idea, of things being in the hypothetical. Do you know subjunctive?
I did grammar.
Yeah. So in English, the subjunctive mood often isn't distinguished. In other languages, it's much more pronounced. But like proper English, you say, if I were a rich man, if I were a rich man, rather than I was, I am, it's I were. I were is correct English. And what that is it's expressing a hypothetical possibility, if I were. And so Victor Turner says in this liminal phase, things happen in the subjunctive mood. Things are hypothetical. Even things that really happen are hypothetical. And I've been thinking about our projects in that way, that like we are doing projects in the short term, a 2-week-long project in the here and now today, but actually it's operating in this subjunctive.
Is this all you do now? Like this is your, I don't know the word career, but this is a full-time thing for you and that's how you sort of sustain living?
Gap Filler has now, as of this minute, I think 3.2 full-time equivalent paid staff. Actually like 7 people, most of them working 10 hours a week or something like that. So we've got funding from quite a lot of different sources. We're a charitable trust. I'm chairman of the board of trustees. That's an entirely voluntary role, so I haven't been paid for any of the work I've done for Gap Filler all along. I was working at the university. I was lecturing in theatre and film studies, so Gap Filler was something I was doing in my so-called spare time. About a year into it, I requested to go down to half-time at the university. So I went on half a wage for a while and didn't earn any other income, but I just felt like I wanted to put more time and energy into Gap Filler and nourishing that, and just on faith that somewhere down the road it would turn into something that could pay me a bit of money. Then because student numbers really dropped after the earthquakes and each year kept dropping more, so the students that were graduating high school were deciding to leave Christchurch, and so it's having kind of ongoing effects. So my university's made several rounds of cuts, and last year my whole department got cut. So I got made redundant again, which is kind of a wonderful thing. So I didn't really have to worry about an income for a while. That happened in December. So from kind of January, February, March, April, May this year, I was living off my redundancy pay. I got offered a part-time job at a different university, Lincoln University, working in environmental management, which I have no expertise in. The title of the research part, so I have a postdoctoral position. Title of the research project is Rehumanizing Sustainability. Yeah. So it's actually, they approached me because of this kind of performance studies approach, the idea of attaching things more closely to changing people's behavior. So sustainability is not just about, that building's sustainable because it's a 4-star, green star, whatever, but actually how it integrates with people and their behaviors. That ends next month, in October, and I have no paid work lined up after that. So I don't know. So I've just done a couple of weeks in Auckland and then earning a little bit of money doing this here, but
you look
don't
petrified.
Yeah. Pretty relaxed
Somehow
about it all.
Yeah, you survived.
It's all right. Yeah.
We're running out of time. Now, you've got 2 books sitting over there. Renee, can you bring them over? Just for a quick flick through, you can see something about
Shall I give the 30-second spiel on each? Yeah. Because really, Gap Filler is a great story, but it's just one piece in a big puzzle that is Christchurch now, where there's a bunch of people and organizations doing things like this. I think we kind of kicked it off, but there's a lot of people following suit. A group of us put together this book about 2 years ago now called Christchurch Transitional City, and it's just a series of 2-page spreads about temporary projects that have been happening in Christchurch. So just, a series of images and then really the vital stats of like, who did the project, how much did it cost, what permits did you need, stuff about planning and start date, and just goes through from, you know, some new street press publications that got started up to public artworks. There's about 30 gap filler projects in here, pop up this, that. So it's just one project after the next to show all of the stuff that's happening in the city. And it's really been pretty amazing. So that's one book that we put out. Yeah. And then
Christchurch Transitional City.
there's these are both put out by, there's a publishing cooperative called Free Range Press. And both of these books were self-published by Free Range Press. This one just came out last week, featuring essays by people such as Professor Peter Newman. Hey. It's called Once in a Lifetime City Building After Disaster in Christchurch, and it's a much fuller picture of the whole city and the government's recovery plan and the economics and the legal structures and the cultural and role of arts and public health and well-being and transport and so it's a big anthology of